Every parent's worst nightmare is losing their child, but what about a child who never had anyone to lose? In a world where family names pass down through generations like treasured heirlooms, one small boy carries the heaviest burden of all. He has no name at all. Gabriel, a weathered mountain man, finds the nameless child sitting alone in the ruins of a burned homestead. The boy's tears have carved clean tracks through the dirt on his face. When Gabriel asks what he's called, the child whispers words that break something inside the old man's chest. "Nobody ever named me." In that moment, Gabriel makes a choice that will change both their lives forever. He looks into those lost eyes and says the words the boy has waited his whole short life to hear. "You're Erik, my son." What happens when two broken souls find each other in the wilderness? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The silence that followed those words hung in the smoky air like a prayer. Gabriel studied the child's face, watching as confusion and hope warred in those dark eyes. The boy, Erik now, clutched a torn cloth doll against his chest, its stuffing spilling from a jagged tear across its middle. The doll's painted smile had faded to a ghostly suggestion, much like the homestead around them. Gabriel had seen plenty of destruction in his 53 years. Wars had a way of leaving scars on both land and people, but this felt different, more personal. The way the boy held that broken toy spoke of a gentleness that hadn't been completely crushed by whatever horror had brought him here. "Erik," the child repeated slowly, as if tasting the name for the first time. His voice was barely a whisper, hoarse from crying or smoke or both. "That's really my name?" "It is now," Gabriel said, his own voice rougher than he intended. He reached out slowly, the way he might approach a wounded animal, and touched the boy's shoulder. The child didn't flinch, which surprised him. "And mine's Gabriel. I reckon that makes us family." Gabriel pulled his worn leather journal from his coat pocket, its pages yellowed and edges frayed from years of travel. He'd kept this book through every mile of his wandering, filling it with sketches of mountains and valleys, notes about weather patterns, observations about wildlife. But mostly, it contained the careful drawings of faces he'd tried to forget: his wife Mary, his daughter Sarah, the students who had once looked up to him with the same trust he now saw in Erik's eyes. The journal fell open to a page he'd drawn months ago, a small schoolhouse with children playing in the yard. Gabriel's throat tightened. Once upon a time, he'd been Professor Gabriel. Morrison, no relation to the sheriff who'd destroyed his life teaching literature and mathematics to eager young minds in a prosperous town called Cedar Falls. He'd had a wife who hummed while she cooked breakfast, a daughter who brought him wildflowers every spring, and a future that stretched ahead like a well-lit road. That was before the fire, before the accusations, before Sheriff Caleb Morrison decided that Gabriel made a convenient scapegoat for his own son's crimes. "Are you really going to take care of me?" Erik asked, interrupting Gabriel's dark memories. The boy had stopped crying, but his grip on the doll remained fierce. Gabriel closed the journal and tucked it away. "I am, but first we need to tend to those cuts on your hands, and you need some food. When did you last eat?" Erik's brow furrowed in concentration. "I don't remember. Maybe yesterday, or the day before." "Time gets all mixed up when you're scared." Gabriel's chest ached. This child had been surviving on his own, possibly for days, in the aftermath of whatever tragedy had claimed his family. The resilience required for that kind of survival spoke to strength that ran bone deep. Well then, food it is. Gabriel stood, his knees protesting after years of sleeping on hard ground. "Can you walk?" Erik nodded and pushed himself to his feet, swaying slightly. Gabriel steadied him with a gentle hand. The boy was thin, too thin, but his legs seemed steady enough. Together, they picked their way through the debris toward Gabriel's horse, a sturdy bay mare named Patience, who waited with the eternal calm of an animal accustomed to strange circumstances. Gabriel had made camp a quarter-mile from the burned settlement, close enough to investigate, but far enough away to avoid being seen by anyone who might come looking. His fire had burned down to glowing coals, perfect for cooking the rabbit he'd snared that morning. Erik watched with wide eyes as Gabriel skinned and cleaned the meat with practiced efficiency. "Where did you learn to do that?" Erik asked. "Living rough teaches you all sorts of things," Gabriel replied, spearing the meat on a green branch. "Back when I was your age, my grandfather took me hunting every autumn. Said a man should know how to provide for his family, no matter what circumstances life threw at him. Did you have a family? Before me, I mean." Gabriel's hands stilled for a moment. The question was innocent enough, but it cut deep. "I did, a long time ago. What happened to them?" Gabriel resumed his work, turning the meat over the coals. How could he explain to a child that his wife and daughter had died in a fire while he was in jail, falsely accused of murder? How could he say that he'd spent the last 15 years running from a crime he didn't commit, carrying guilt for deaths he couldn't prevent? "Sometimes life takes people away from us," he said finally. "The important thing is what we do after. Whether we let the loss make us bitter, or whether we find a way to honor their memory by doing good for others." Erik considered this with the seriousness of someone far older than his years. "Is that what you're doing with me? Honoring their memory?" Gabriel met the boy's eyes across the fire. "Maybe. Or maybe you're the one doing me a kindness by letting me be your pa." The word "pa" slipped out before Gabriel could stop it, and he felt his face warm. He'd never called himself that before, even with his own daughter. Sarah had always called him papa or father, never the informal pa that spoke of dusty boots and calloused hands rather than books and blackboards. But Erik's face lit up, like Gabriel had offered him the world. "Pa," he repeated, testing the word. "I like that." They ate in companionable silence as the sun began its descent toward the western peaks. Gabriel watched Erik eat with the careful deliberation of someone who'd learned not to waste food, saving the last few bites and wrapping them in a piece of cloth. For later, Erik explained when he noticed Gabriel watching. "There'll be more food tomorrow," Gabriel assured him. "And the day after that. You don't need to save it." Erik looked skeptical but didn't argue. Gabriel made a mental note to ensure there was always plenty of food visible in their camp until the boy learned to trust in abundance again. As darkness settled over the mountains, Gabriel banked the fire and spread his bedroll near enough to the coals to provide warmth, but far enough away to avoid sparks. He'd been sleeping alone for so many years that sharing space felt strange. But Erik curled up against Gabriel's side with the natural trust of a child who'd found safety after too long without it. "Pa?" Erik's voice was drowsy but persistent. "Yes, son. Will you tell me about your family? The one from before?" Gabriel stared up at the stars, brilliant in the clear mountain air. For 15 years, he'd avoided talking about Mary and Sarah, as if speaking their names might somehow diminish their memory or increase his pain. But Erik's question came from genuine curiosity, not cruelty, and Gabriel found that the sharp edges of his grief had worn smooth with time. "My wife was named Mary," he began, his voice soft in the darkness. "She had hair the color of wheat in summer, and she could make even the most stubborn student love mathematics. She taught at the school with me. What about your daughter?" "Sarah. She would have been about your age now if she'd lived. She loved to read, used to sneak books under her covers and read by candlelight until Mary or I caught her. She had your same determination, your same way of asking questions that made adults think harder about their answers." Erik was quiet for a long moment. "Do you think they would have liked me?" Gabriel's throat tightened. "They would have loved you, Erik. No question about that." "Good," Erik murmured, already half asleep. "I would have liked them too." Gabriel lay awake long after Erik's breathing had settled into the rhythm of deep sleep. The boy's weight against his side felt simultaneously foreign and natural, like putting on a coat you'd forgotten you owned. For the first time in 15 years, Gabriel felt something other than the grinding weight of guilt and loneliness. He felt purpose. Tomorrow they would need to move deeper into the mountains. Gabriel's instincts, honed by years of avoiding pursuit, told him that staying in one place too long was dangerous. But tonight, with Erik sleeping trustingly beside him and the stars wheeling overhead in their ancient patterns, Gabriel allowed himself to imagine a different kind of future, one where he wasn't constantly looking over his shoulder, where Erik could attend school and make friends and grow up with the security that every child deserved. It was a dangerous dream, he knew. Men like him, men with prices on their heads and pasts full of shadows, didn't get happy endings. But as Erik shifted in his sleep and mumbled "Pa" in a voice thick with contentment, Gabriel thought that maybe, just maybe, some rules were meant to be broken. The worn leather journal pressed against his ribs where he'd tucked it inside his coat. Tomorrow he would add a new entry. The day he stopped being just Gabriel the Wanderer and became Gabriel the Father. The day he found Erik and Erik found him. The day they became family. 3 days had passed since Gabriel claimed Erik as his son, and the boy was beginning to show signs of the resilient spirit that had kept him alive in the ruins. His cuts were healing cleanly, and he'd gained enough strength to help Gabriel break camp each morning and set it up again each evening. More importantly, he'd started asking questions, endless, curious questions about everything from why pine needles stayed green in winter to how Gabriel knew which berries were safe to eat. Gabriel found himself enjoying the role of teacher again, even if his classroom was now the vast expanse of Wyoming wilderness and his lessons focused on survival rather than literature. He showed Erik how to read the sky for weather changes, how to find water by following game trails, and how to move quietly through underbrush, without leaving obvious signs of their passage. It was this last skill that proved crucial when they approached the trading post at Millbrook Crossing. Gabriel had hoped to avoid settlements entirely, but their supplies were running low, and Erik needed warmer clothing before the mountain nights grew colder. The trading post was small and isolated, the kind of place where a man could conduct business without too many questions. Or so Gabriel had thought. "Stay close to me," Gabriel murmured to Erik as they approached the weathered building. "Keep your eyes down and don't speak unless someone speaks to you directly." Erik nodded solemnly. He'd learned quickly that survival sometimes meant making yourself invisible. Inside, the trading post smelled of leather, tobacco, and the lingering aroma of coffee. The proprietor, a heavy-set man with graying whiskers, looked up from his ledger as they entered. "Morning, folks. What can I do for you?" "Need some supplies," Gabriel said, keeping his voice neutral. "Warm clothes for the boy, some coffee, beans, and ammunition if you have it." The proprietor's gaze lingered on Gabriel's face, a moment longer than felt comfortable. But he nodded and began gathering the requested items. Erik wandered toward a display of simple toys and trinkets, his attention caught by a wooden horse carved with remarkable detail. Gabriel was examining a heavy wool coat that might fit Erik when he heard the proprietor's sharp intake of breath. He looked up to see the man staring at something on the wall. Behind his counter, a collection of wanted posters that Gabriel hadn't noticed when they entered. The proprietor's eyes flicked between Gabriel and one particular poster. Gabriel's blood turned to ice water in his veins. "Erik," he said quietly. "Come here, son." Something in Gabriel's tone made Erik abandon the wooden horse and hurry to his side. Gabriel placed a protective hand on the boy's shoulder, feeling the tension that suddenly filled the small space. "That'll be $8 for everything," the proprietor said, but his voice had changed. There was calculation in it now, and greed. Gabriel pulled out his money with deliberate calm, counting out the bills. "Much obliged." As they gathered their purchases, Gabriel caught a glimpse of the poster that had caught the proprietor's attention. His own face stared back at him, 15 years younger but unmistakable. The text below offered a substantial reward for his capture in connection with the murder of Deputy Thomas Brennan. Gabriel's jaw tightened. Sheriff Morrison had been busy over the years, keeping the bounty active, probably adding to it. A man could live comfortably for months on that kind of money. "You folks traveling far?" the proprietor asked with forced casualness. "Not far," Gabriel replied. "Come on, Erik." They left the trading post with measured steps, Gabriel fighting every instinct that screamed at him to run. Once they were out of sight of the building, he lifted Erik onto Patience's back and swung up behind him, urging the mare into a steady trot. Pa, what's wrong? Erik asked, sensing Gabriel's tension. Just need to put some distance between us and that place, Gabriel said. Sometimes it's better to be cautious, but caution might not be enough. Gabriel knew the proprietor's type, the kind of man who saw opportunity in every stranger's misfortune. By evening, word would spread that Gabriel Morrison had been spotted at Millbrook Crossing, traveling with a boy. By tomorrow, every bounty hunter within 100 miles would be converging on their position. They rode hard for 2 hours before Gabriel allowed them to stop at a stream to rest patience and refill their water bottles. Erik sat on a fallen log, swinging his legs and watching Gabriel with the serious expression he wore when he was trying to work out a problem. Pa, are you in trouble with the law? Gabriel's hands stilled on Patience's bridle. He'd hoped to avoid this conversation for a while longer, to give Erik time to trust him completely before burdening him with the truth. But the boy deserved honesty, especially if that honesty might keep him safe. Yes, Gabriel said simply. I am. Did you do something bad? I'm accused of doing something bad. There's a difference. Erik considered this with the gravity of a much older person. What are you accused of? Gabriel sat down beside Erik on the log, choosing his words carefully. 15 years ago, I was a school teacher in a town called Cedar Falls. There was a deputy sheriff there named Thomas Brennan, a good man who was investigating some corruption in the sheriff's department. One night, someone killed Deputy Brennan and made it look like I did it. But you didn't? No, son, I didn't. But sometimes the truth doesn't matter as much as what people want to believe. Erik was quiet for a long moment, his young mind working through the implications. So we have to keep running? Gabriel's heart broke a little at the resignation in Erik's voice. This boy had already lost everything once. Now Gabriel was asking him to live as a fugitive. For now, Gabriel said. But I promise you this, Erik. Someday we'll find a way to prove the truth. Someday we'll have a real home, and you'll go to school, and we won't have to look over our shoulders anymore. Do you promise? Gabriel met Erik's eyes, seeing the desperate hope there. It was a promise he had no right to make, a future he had no guarantee he could provide. But looking at this boy who'd already suffered so much, Gabriel found himself nodding. I promise. They resumed their journey as the sun began its descent toward the western peaks. Gabriel pushed them harder than usual, taking paths that would be difficult for mounted men to follow. He taught Erik the basics of covering their tracks, how to disturb the ground in ways that looked natural, how to use streams and rocky ground to break their trail. As they made camp that night in a hidden valley sheltered by towering pines, Gabriel found himself studying Erik's face in the firelight. The boy had adapted to their circumstances with remarkable resilience, but Gabriel could see the toll that constant vigilance was taking. Erik deserved better than a life spent running from shadows. For the first time since leaving Cedar Falls, Gabriel began to seriously consider the possibility of fighting back instead of running. He was older now, more experienced in the ways of survival and evasion. More importantly, he had something worth fighting for. Pa? Erik's voice was drowsy as he settled into his bedroll. Yes, son? When we find our real home, will you teach me to read better, like you taught your other students? Gabriel's throat tightened. Count on it, Erik. I'll teach you everything I know. As Erik drifted off to sleep, Gabriel stared into the dying fire and made a silent vow. Sheriff Morrison had taken everything from him once, his family, his reputation, his future. But Gabriel would be damned if he'd let the man destroy Erik's chances at a real life, somewhere out there in the darkness. Bounty hunters were already saddling their horses and checking their weapons, drawn by the promise of easy money. Let them come. Gabriel had been running for 15 years, but he was done being prey. For Erik's sake, it was time to become the hunter. The first sign of pursuit came 2 days later. Hoofprints in the soft earth near a stream where they'd stopped to water Patience. Gabriel studied the tracks with the careful attention of a man whose life depended on reading such signs correctly. 3 horses, shod and well-fed, moving at a steady pace. Not travelers or settlers, but men with purpose. We need to move, Gabriel said quietly, helping Erik pack their few belongings with practiced efficiency. They abandoned the game trails Gabriel had been following and struck out across rougher terrain, places where horses would struggle and leave obvious signs of their passage. Gabriel pushed them higher into the mountains, where the air grew thin and the nights carried the bite of early winter. Erik never complained, though Gabriel could see the toll the constant movement was taking on him. The boy's steps grew heavier each day, and he'd begun to walk with the careful gait of someone whose feet were developing blisters, despite the sturdy boots Gabriel had bought at the trading post. During their third night in the high country, as they huddled around a small fire built in a natural depression to hide its light, Erik surprised Gabriel by pulling out a piece of pine wood and his small knife. "What are you making?" Gabriel asked, grateful for any distraction from the endless vigilance their situation required. "A cross," Erik said, his tongue poking out slightly in concentration as he carved. "I found the wood this morning. It felt right to make something." Gabriel watched the boy's careful work, noting the steady hands and the attention to detail. The cross was simple but well-proportioned, the kind of thing that spoke to an innate sense of craftsmanship. "Why a cross?" Gabriel asked gently. Erik was quiet for a moment, continuing his carving. "I don't remember much about before you found me, but I remember someone telling me that crosses mean hope, that they mean someone's watching over you, even when you can't see them." Gabriel's throat tightened. "That's a good thing to remember. Do you think God is watching over us, Pa?" It was a question Gabriel had wrestled with for 15 years. If God was watching, why had he allowed Mary and Sarah to die? Why had he permitted Gabriel's frame-up in exile? Why did innocent children like Erik suffer? But looking at the boy's earnest face in the firelight, Gabriel found he couldn't voice those doubts. "I think," Gabriel said carefully, "that sometimes God works through people. Maybe he brought us together for a reason." Erik nodded solemnly and returned to his carving. The soft scraping of knife against wood was oddly comforting in the vast silence of the mountains. The next morning brought their first real test. Gabriel was teaching Erik to identify edible plants when Patience's ears pricked forward, swiveling toward the valley below. Gabriel immediately went still, placing a warning hand on Erik's shoulder. 3 riders were making their way up the slope, following what Gabriel had hoped was an invisible trail. Even at a distance, Gabriel could see they moved with the purposeful confidence of men who knew their business. "Erik," Gabriel whispered, "remember what I taught you about being invisible?" The boy nodded and immediately began moving toward a cluster of boulders that would provide cover. Gabriel was proud to see how quietly Erik moved, how well he'd absorbed the lessons about placing his feet and controlling his breathing. They crouched behind the rocks as the riders drew closer. Gabriel could hear their voices now, rough and businesslike. "Trail's fresh," one of them was saying. "Maybe 6 hours old. Morrison said he'd be traveling with a boy," another replied. That'll slow him down considerable." Gabriel's blood chilled. These weren't just bounty hunters following a cold trail. They had specific information about Erik. That meant Sheriff Morrison was actively coordinating the search, probably sending word ahead to every town and trading post in the territory. The third rider, a lean man with a scar across his left cheek, pulled up his horse and studied the ground. "They're heading toward Devil's Canyon. If we can get around to the north face, we can trap them in there." Gabriel's mind raced. Devil's Canyon was exactly where he'd been planning to lead them, a maze of narrow passages and hidden caves where a man could disappear for weeks. But if these men knew the country well enough to anticipate his route, the canyon would become a trap instead of a sanctuary. The riders moved on, following the false trail Gabriel had laid the previous afternoon. As soon as they were out of sight, Gabriel began planning a new route, one that would take them away from Devil's Canyon and deeper into truly wild country. "Pa," Erik whispered. "Those men are looking for us, aren't they?" "They are, son. What happens if they catch us?" Gabriel met Erik's eyes, seeing the fear there, but also the trust. The boy believed Gabriel would protect him, and Gabriel was determined not to betray that faith. "They won't catch us," Gabriel said firmly. "I won't let that happen." They waited another hour before moving, giving the bounty hunters time to get well ahead of them. Then Gabriel led Erik in a completely different direction, toward country so rough and remote that few men would dare follow. As they traveled, Gabriel began teaching Erik more advanced skills, how to move across different types of terrain without leaving tracks, how to find shelter in places that didn't look promising, how to identify the signs that indicated whether they were being followed. Erik proved to be a quick learner, his natural intelligence sharpened by necessity. He asked intelligent questions and remembered Gabriel's answers, building a mental library of survival knowledge that might someday save his life. That evening, as they made camp in a hidden grove beside a small spring, Erik showed Gabriel his finished cross. The boy had worked on it throughout the day during their rest stops, and the result was surprisingly elegant. Smooth curves and clean lines that spoke to both skill and patience. "It's beautiful work," Gabriel said, meaning it. "You've got good hands for carving," Erik beamed at the praise. "Will you keep it safe for me, in case something happens?" Gabriel's heart clenched. "Nothing's going to happen to you, Erik, I promise, but just in case." Gabriel took the cross, feeling its smooth weight in his palm. It was warm from Erik's handling, and he could see the care that had gone into every detail. "Just in case," Gabriel agreed, tucking the cross into his inner coat pocket next to his journal. That night, as Erik slept curled against Gabriel's side, Gabriel stared up at the stars and tried to plan their next move. The mountains offered safety, but not indefinitely. Eventually, winter would drive them to lower elevations. Back into country where Sheriff Morrison's influence reached, Gabriel found himself thinking about Cedar Falls, about the evidence that might still exist to prove his innocence. For 15 years, he'd been content to run, to disappear into the wilderness and leave his former life behind. But Erik changed everything. The boy deserved a future that didn't involve constant fear and endless flight. Maybe it was time to stop running towards something and start running towards something instead. Maybe it was time to go home and face the truth, whatever the cost. The cross pressed against Gabriel's ribs where he'd tucked it away, a tangible reminder of hope and faith, even in the darkest circumstances. For Erik's sake, Gabriel was beginning to believe that some fights were worth having, no matter how long the odds. It was during their 4th morning together that Erik revealed his secret. Gabriel was washing their tin cups in a mountain stream when he noticed the boy sitting on a boulder, staring intently at something in his hands. Erik's shoulders were tense in the way that indicated he was wrestling with a difficult decision. "What have you got there, son?" Gabriel asked gently, settling beside him on the rock. Erik's fingers tightened around whatever he was holding. For a moment, Gabriel thought the boy might not answer. Then, with the careful deliberation of someone revealing their most precious possession, Erik opened his hands. A small photograph lay in his palm, its edges worn soft from handling. The image was faded, but clear enough to show a young woman with kind eyes and dark hair pulled back from her face. She wore a simple dress and stood beside what looked like a vegetable garden, her smile warm and genuine. Gabriel's breath caught. "Erik, who is this?" "I think she was my mother," Erik said quietly. "I've had it since before you found me. It was in my pocket with some coins and a piece of bread. Sometimes I dream about her, but I can't remember her voice or her name or anything else about her." Gabriel studied the photograph with careful attention. The woman looked to be in her 20s, with strong hands and the kind of face that suggested both intelligence and compassion. Behind her, Gabriel could make out part of a wooden house and what appeared to be a well-tended garden. "She's beautiful," Gabriel said. "You can see the kindness in her eyes. Do you think she loved me?" Erik's voice was barely above a whisper. Gabriel's throat tightened. "Son, look at this picture. Look at her face. That's the expression of a woman who loved someone very much. I'd bet everything I own that she loved you more than her own life." Erik nodded, blinking back tears. "I kept it hidden because I was afraid if someone saw it, they might take it away. It's the only thing I have from before." Gabriel understood the weight of that confession. In revealing the photograph, Erik was trusting Gabriel with the most precious remnant of his past and potentially complicating their future together. If Erik had family somewhere, If someone was looking for him, Gabriel's claim on the boy became morally murky. "Erik," Gabriel said carefully, "do you want to try to find out who she was, where you came from?" The boy was quiet for a long moment, his thumb tracing the edge of the photograph. "I don't know. What if she had family who's looking for me? What if I'm supposed to be with them instead of you?" Gabriel felt something cold settle in his stomach. The possibility had occurred to him, of course, but hearing Erik voice it made it real in a way that physical danger never could. Losing Erik to bounty hunters would be terrible, but losing him to rightful family would be a different kind of devastation entirely. "That's a choice you'll have to make," Gabriel said, fighting to keep his voice steady. "But whatever you decide, I'll help you see it through, even if it means letting you go." Erik looked up at him with wide eyes. "You would do that? Even though you said I was your son. Being a father means wanting what's best for your child, even when it hurts," Gabriel replied. "If you have family out there who loves you, you deserve to know about them." They sat in silence for several minutes, both lost in their own thoughts. Finally, Erik carefully tucked the photograph back into his shirt pocket. "Can we think about it for a while?" Erik asked. "I like being your son." "I don't want to give that up unless I have to." Gabriel felt a wave of relief so strong it made him dizzy. "Of course we can think about it. There's no rush." But as they broke camp and continued their journey deeper into the wilderness, Gabriel found himself studying every settlement they passed, wondering if one of them might hold the key to Erik's past. The moral complexity of the situation weighed on him. Was he helping Erik by giving him a new life, or was he denying the boy his rightful heritage? Their route took them through increasingly remote country, following game trails and creek beds that existed on no official maps. Gabriel pushed them hard, driven by the growing certainty that Sheriff Morrison's men were closing in. The signs were subtle but unmistakable: broken branches at the wrong height, disturbed ground that didn't match natural animal movement, the occasional glint of metal in the distance that could only be rifle barrels or spurs. On their 6th day together, they encountered a traveling preacher making his way between remote settlements. The man was elderly, with a white beard and eyes that had seen enough of the world to be kind without being naive. His wagon was loaded with Bibles and medical supplies, and his mule looked as patient and weathered as its owner. "Afternoon, friends," the preacher called as they approached his small camp. "I'm Brother Nathaniel Hayes. You folks look like you could use a hot meal and some Christian fellowship." Gabriel's instincts screamed caution, but Erik was clearly drawn to the old man's gentle manner. After days of isolation and constant vigilance, the boy needed human contact that didn't come with the threat of violence. "Much obliged," Gabriel said, dismounting from Patience. "I'm Gabriel, and this is my son, Erik." Brother Hayes studied Gabriel's face with the penetrating gaze of someone accustomed to reading character in strangers. Whatever he saw there seemed to satisfy him, because he nodded and gestured toward his fire. "Coffee's fresh, and I've got stew enough for an army. The Lord provides, and he expects us to share what we receive." As they ate, Brother Hayes regaled them with stories of his travels and the people he'd ministered to in remote corners of the territory. Gabriel found himself relaxing slightly, lulled by the old man's gentle manner and obvious sincerity. It was Erik who brought out the photograph. "Brother Hayes," Erik said hesitantly, "have you ever seen this woman in your travels?" The preacher studied the image with careful attention, holding it close to the firelight. Gabriel watched his face, looking for any sign of recognition. "She has a familiar look about her," Brother Hayes said slowly. "But I meet so many people in my travels, it's hard to be certain." "Where did you come across this photograph, son?" "She might have been my mother," Erik said. "Before Pa found me, I mean." Brother Hayes glanced between Gabriel and Erik, clearly noting the difference in their coloring and features. But he asked no probing questions, accepting their relationship at face value. "I'll tell you what," the preacher said, handing the photograph back to Erik. "There's a settlement called Willowbrook, about 2 days' ride southeast of here. The folks there have been in this country for 20 years or more. If this lady lived anywhere in these parts, someone in Willowbrook would remember her." Gabriel felt Erik tense beside him. The boy wanted answers, but Gabriel could see the fear in his eyes, fear of what those answers might mean for their newfound family. "We'll consider it," Gabriel said diplomatically. "Thank you for the information." That night, as Brother Hayes snored peacefully across the fire and Erik slept curled in his bedroll, Gabriel stared into the dying coals and wrestled with impossible choices. Every instinct told him to avoid Willowbrook, to keep Erik safe by keeping him ignorant of his past. But the boy deserved to know his history, deserved the chance to make an informed choice about his future. The photograph crinkled softly as Erik shifted in his sleep, and Gabriel made a decision that would change both their lives forever. Tomorrow, they would ride toward Willowbrook and whatever truth waited there, even if that truth destroyed the family they'd built together. The journey to Willowbrook took 3 days instead of 2, as Gabriel chose routes that avoided main trails and kept them hidden in the deep timber. During those days, he began Erik's formal education in earnest, using his worn teaching slate to introduce letters and numbers with the same patience he'd once shown his students in Cedar Falls. The slate was small and portable, its wooden frame darkened by years of use, and its black surface scored with countless lessons. Gabriel had carried it through every mile of his exile, unable to abandon this last tangible connection to his former calling. Now, watching Erik's face light up as he mastered each new letter, Gabriel understood why he'd never been able to leave it behind. "Try writing your name," Gabriel said, handing Erik the chalk. Erik gripped the small piece of white stone with careful concentration, his tongue poking out slightly as he formed each letter. The E came first, tall and confident, followed by the R and I, and finally the K. When he finished, Erik looked up at Gabriel with pride shining in his dark eyes. "Look, Pa, I can write, Erik." Gabriel's throat tightened. "That's fine work, son. Real fine work." They were camped in a grove of aspen trees, their leaves already showing the gold that would soon spread across the high country. Gabriel had chosen this spot carefully, hidden from the main trail, but with clear sightlines in all directions. His years of running had taught him to always think 3 moves ahead, to anticipate danger before it materialized. Erik erased his name with his sleeve and tried again, this time adding careful flourishes to each letter. Gabriel watched with the satisfaction of a born teacher, seeing the boy's natural intelligence assert itself now that he had the tools to express it. "Tell me about your school," Erik said as he practiced. "The one from before?" Gabriel settled back against a fallen log, the teaching slate balanced on his knees. "It was a good school. 2 rooms, one for the younger children, one for the older ones. Mary taught the little ones their letters and numbers, while I worked with the older students on mathematics and literature." "What's literature?" "Stories, poems, books that help us understand what it means to be human." Erik considered this seriously. "Will you teach me literature?" "I will. When you're ready." Gabriel paused, watching Erik's careful letter formation. "Would you like that? Learning to read stories?" "Yes, sir." "I want to learn everything you know." Gabriel's chest swelled with pride and pain in equal measure. Erik's hunger for knowledge reminded him so much of his daughter, Sarah, who had approached learning with the same fierce determination. "What happened to your students when you had to leave?" Erik asked. Gabriel was quiet for a moment, remembering faces he'd tried to forget. "I hope they found another teacher. Children that age need guidance, need someone to show them what's possible in the world, like you're showing me." "Yes, son, like I'm showing you." They worked in companionable silence for another hour, Erik progressing from individual letters to simple words. Gabriel found himself falling back into the rhythms of teaching, patient correction, gentle encouragement, the careful building of confidence alongside skill. As the sun reached its zenith, Gabriel began to notice signs that they were approaching settled country. Stumps where trees had been cut for building, faint wheel ruts that spoke of regular wagon traffic, the distant sound of an axe biting into wood. "Pack up the slate," Gabriel said quietly. "We're getting close to Willowbrook." Erik's face grew serious as he carefully cleaned the slate and tucked it away in Gabriel's saddlebags. The boy had been growing more anxious as they approached the settlement. torn between wanting answers about his past and fearing what those answers might mean for his future with Gabriel. Willowbrook proved to be larger than Gabriel had expected, perhaps 40 buildings clustered around a main street, with outlying farms spreading into the surrounding valley. Smoke rose from chimneys, and Gabriel could see people moving about their daily business with the unhurried pace of a community that had found its rhythm. Gabriel's instincts screamed at him to turn around, to take Erik and disappear back into the wilderness before anyone could ask uncomfortable questions. But Erik deserved to know his history, and Gabriel had promised to help him find it. They approached the settlement from the east, following a well-worn road that spoke of regular traffic. Gabriel kept patience to a steady walk, giving himself time to study the layout and identify potential escape routes if things went badly. "Remember what we discussed," Gabriel murmured to Erik. "Let me do the talking at first. If anyone asks, you're my son, and we're just passing through." Erik nodded, but Gabriel could see the tension in the boy's shoulders. This was harder for Erik than facing bounty hunters or sleeping cold in the mountains. Those were external threats that could be met with courage and cunning. This was the possibility of learning truths that might change everything he'd come to believe about himself. They stopped first at the general store, a solid building with windows that showed a well-stocked interior. Gabriel needed supplies anyway, and stores were often the best places to gather information. Without arousing suspicion, the proprietor was a middle-aged woman with graying hair and sharp eyes that took in every detail of Gabriel and Erik's appearance. But her manner was friendly enough as she helped Gabriel select what they needed. "Don't think I've seen you folks before," she said conversationally. "You traveling through?" "That's right," Gabriel replied. "Heard this was a good place to rest and resupply." "It is that. We get a fair number of travelers this time of year, folks heading south before the mountain passes close." She studied Erik with the frank curiosity of someone used to knowing everyone in her community. "Fine-looking boy you've got there." "Thank you," Gabriel said, placing a protective hand on Erik's shoulder. The woman's gaze lingered on Erik's face, and Gabriel saw something flicker in her expression, a moment of uncertainty, as if she'd seen something familiar but couldn't quite place it. "How long have you been in Willowbrook?" Gabriel asked, hoping to distract her from whatever resemblance she thought she'd detected. "Oh, 23 years come spring. My husband and I were among the first families to settle here." She rang up Gabriel's purchases with practiced efficiency. "Built this store when there was nothing but timber and hope in this valley." Gabriel paid for their supplies, fighting the urge to hurry Erik out of the store before the woman's memory could crystallize around whatever similarity she'd noticed. But as they prepared to leave, she spoke again. "You know, your boy reminds me of someone. Can't quite place it, but there's something familiar about his features." Gabriel's blood chilled, but he kept his voice steady. "People often say that. He's got one of those faces that reminds folks of someone they used to know." The woman nodded, but Gabriel could see she wasn't entirely satisfied with that explanation. As they left the store, Erik tugged on Gabriel's sleeve. "She recognized something, didn't she?" Erik whispered. Gabriel glanced back to see the woman watching them through her store window, her expression thoughtful and troubled. "Maybe," Gabriel admitted, "but that doesn't necessarily mean anything. People see what they want to see sometimes." Even as he said it, Gabriel knew he was grasping at straws. The woman had recognized something in Erik's features, and in a settlement the size of Willowbrook, that recognition would spread quickly through the community. Their quest for answers was about to become much more complicated. They found the abandoned sheriff's badge 3 miles outside of Willowbrook, half buried in the ruins of what had once been a small cabin. Gabriel dismounted from Patience to examine the structure, noting the way the roof had collapsed and weeds had grown up through the floorboards. This place had been empty for years, possibly decades. Erik wandered through the ruins, while Gabriel checked for signs of recent habitation. It was the boy who called out, his voice tight with curiosity and something that might have been recognition. "Pa, look at this." Gabriel turned to see Erik kneeling beside what had been the cabin's hearth. brushing dirt and debris from a tarnished star-shaped badge. Even dulled by weather and time, the words "Deputy Sheriff" were still clearly visible around the badge's perimeter. Gabriel's breath caught as Erik handed him the badge. The weight of it in his palm brought back memories he'd spent 15 years trying to bury. Memories of his own arrest, of cold iron shackles, of sitting in a cell while his wife and daughter burned to death in their home. "Whose badge do you think it was?" Erik asked, settling beside Gabriel on a fallen beam. Gabriel turned the badge over in his hands, studying the scratches and dents that spoke of years of honest service. Hard to say. Could have belonged to anyone, but even as he spoke, Gabriel's mind was racing back to that terrible night in Cedar Falls. Deputy Thomas Brennan had been investigating corruption in Sheriff Morrison's department. Corruption that went all the way to the top. Brennan had been close to exposing the truth. When someone put a bullet in his back and left his body where Gabriel would find it, Gabriel had been returning from a late evening of grading papers when he stumbled across Brennan's corpse in the alley behind the schoolhouse. He'd knelt to check for signs of life, getting the deputy's blood on his hands and clothes. When Sheriff Morrison and his men arrived minutes later, Gabriel's guilt appeared obvious. "You've gone all quiet," Erik observed. "Does the badge mean something to you?" Gabriel forced himself to focus on the present, on Erik's concerned face, rather than the ghosts that haunted his past. "It reminds me of something that happened a long time ago. Something that changed my life. The thing you were accused of." Gabriel nodded slowly. "There was a deputy sheriff in Cedar Falls, a good man named Thomas Brennan. He was trying to expose corruption in his own department when someone killed him. I found his body, and that made me look guilty of his murder." Erik studied the badge with new interest. Was he wearing a badge like this? He was, and after he died, it disappeared. Sheriff Morrison claimed it was never found. Gabriel's mind worked through the implications. If this badge had belonged to Thomas Brennan, how had it ended up in an abandoned cabin miles from Cedar Falls? Who had brought it here and why? Erik seemed to sense the weight of Gabriel's thoughts. He moved closer, offering the comfort of his presence without demanding explanations Gabriel wasn't ready to give. "Pa, do you think the person who killed that deputy might have lived here?" It was an astute question, one that demonstrated how much Erik had learned about reading signs and understanding motivations during their time together. Gabriel looked around the ruins with fresh eyes, noting details he'd missed before. The cabin had been abandoned hastily. Personal belongings still lay scattered among the debris: a tin cup, a pair of worn boots, a rifle with a broken stock. Whoever had lived here had left in a hurry, taking only what they could carry. "It's possible," Gabriel said carefully, "but we may never know for certain." Erik was quiet for a moment, then surprised Gabriel by asking, "Do you think justice always wins in the end?" Gabriel's throat tightened. It was the kind of question his students in Cedar Falls used to ask, the sort of earnest inquiry that demanded an honest answer, even when the truth was complicated. "I think," Gabriel said slowly, "that justice is something we have to fight for. It doesn't happen by itself. Good people have to be willing to stand up for what's right, even when it's dangerous, like you're doing by taking care of me." Gabriel felt something crack open in his chest. "Taking care of you isn't justice, son. It's just love." Erik nodded, as if that made perfect sense to him. "But sometimes love is what justice looks like, isn't it? Someone deciding that what's happening to another person isn't right and doing something to fix it." Gabriel stared at the boy in amazement. At 8 years old, Erik had grasped something that had taken Gabriel 15 years of running to understand. Justice wasn't always about courts and laws and official verdicts. Sometimes it was as simple as one person refusing to let another suffer alone. "You're a wise boy, Erik, wiser than you know." They spent another hour searching the ruins, but found nothing else that might provide answers about the badge's origins. As they prepared to leave, Gabriel made a decision that surprised him. "Erik, I want you to keep this badge." The boy's eyes widened. "But it's evidence, isn't it? Proof of something important?" "Maybe. But more than that, it's a reminder that sometimes the truth takes a long time to come to light." That doesn't mean we stop believing in it. Erik accepted the badge with the solemnity of someone receiving a sacred trust. He wrapped it carefully in a piece of cloth and tucked it into his saddlebag next to his wooden cross. As they rode back toward Willowbrook, Gabriel found himself thinking about the years he'd spent running. All this time, he'd told himself he was being practical, staying alive, avoiding a corrupt system that had already failed him once. But looking at Erik's earnest face, Gabriel wondered if he'd really been running from justice or toward it. The boy deserved better than a life spent hiding in the wilderness. He deserved the chance to attend school, to make friends, to grow up with the security that came from being part of a community. And that meant Gabriel would have to stop running eventually. The question was whether he'd have the courage to face the truth about Thomas Brennan's murder, and whether that truth would set them free or destroy the family they'd built together. Back in Willowbrook, Gabriel could see the general store proprietor speaking earnestly with a small group of townspeople. Even at a distance, their body language suggested intense discussion. Word was spreading about the stranger and his boy, and Gabriel knew they couldn't stay hidden much longer. "Pa!" Erik's voice was small and uncertain. "What if the people here want to take me away from you?" Gabriel reached over and squeezed Erik's shoulder. "Then we'll face that together, son. Whatever comes next, we'll face it together." It was a promise that would be tested sooner than either of them imagined. The letter that changed everything was hidden in the false bottom of Gabriel's saddlebag, wrapped in oiled cloth beneath his spare ammunition. He'd carried it for 15 years without reading it, unable to bear the pain of his wife's final words. But as they made camp in the hills above Willowbrook, watching the town's lights flicker in the gathering dusk, Gabriel finally found the courage to confront the past he'd been running from. Erik was practicing his letters on the teaching slate, absorbed in forming perfect curves and angles by firelight. Gabriel used the boy's concentration as cover, carefully extracting the letter from its hiding place. His hands trembled as he unfolded the delicate paper. Mary's familiar handwriting blurring through tears he'd refused to shed for 15 years. "My dearest Gabriel, if you are reading this, then the worst has happened, and I am gone. I pray that you survived whatever brought you to this letter, and that you will forgive me for keeping secrets in our final days together. I know you didn't kill Thomas Brennan. I've always known it, and I've spent our last weeks together gathering proof of your innocence. There is a man named Walter Hutchins, a private investigator from Denver, who has been helping me document Sheriff Morrison's corruption. We have evidence, Gabriel. Real evidence that will clear your name and see Morrison face justice for his crimes. Mr. Hutchins has deposited all our findings in a safety deposit box at the First National Bank of Cedar Falls. The key is hidden behind the loose brick beside our kitchen hearth, the one you always meant to fix but never found time for. The box is registered under my maiden name, Mary Catherine Whitfield. I should have told you about the investigation, but I feared what Morrison might do if he suspected we were building a case against him. I thought I could protect you by keeping you ignorant of my actions. I see now that I was wrong. By the time you read this, my caution will have cost us everything. Know this above all else. You are a good man who deserves justice and peace. Do not let Morrison's lies define the rest of your life. Find Mr. Hutchins if you can. He believed in your innocence when no one else would. Give Sarah my love, and tell her that her mother fought for her father's honor, even when all seemed lost. Forever yours." Mary Gabriel's hands shook as he finished reading. Mary had known. She had believed in him, had fought for him, had died believing in his innocence. And somewhere in Cedar Falls, evidence of that innocence had been waiting for 15 years in a bank vault. "Pa, what's wrong?" Gabriel looked up to find Erik watching him with concern, the teaching slate forgotten in his lap. Tears were streaming down Gabriel's face, and he made no effort to hide them. "Nothing's wrong, son. Everything's right. For the first time in 15 years, everything's right." Erik set aside his slate and moved closer. "Is that a letter from your wife?" Gabriel nodded, unable to trust his voice. Erik waited patiently while Gabriel composed himself, offering the wordless comfort of his presence. "She believed in me," Gabriel finally managed. Even when I couldn't believe in myself, she was fighting to prove my innocence. What did she find? Gabriel reread portions of the letter, his mind racing with implications. Evidence that Sheriff Morrison was corrupt. Proof that I didn't kill Deputy Brennan. It's been sitting in a bank vault all this time, waiting for me to come home and claim it. Erik's eyes were wide with understanding. So you could clear your name? We could stop running? We could, Gabriel said. But even as he spoke, he recognized the obstacles they faced. But Cedar Falls is 300 miles from here, and Morrison will have men watching for us. Getting there won't be easy, but we have to try, don't we? If there's proof of your innocence, we have to try. Gabriel looked at this boy, who had already shown such courage in the face of hardship, who spoke of justice with the certainty of youth. Erik was right, of course. They had to try. For Erik's future, for Gabriel's redemption, for Mary's memory, they had to try. Yes, Gabriel said firmly. We have to try. Erik grinned and threw his arms around Gabriel's neck. I knew you were innocent, Pa. I knew it from the first moment I met you. Bad men don't take care of lost children. Gabriel held Erik close, feeling 15 years of guilt and shame begin to lift from his shoulders. He'd been so focused on his own pain that he'd forgotten the most important truth. Innocence didn't require proof to exist. It simply was, regardless of what others believed. There's something else, Gabriel said, pulling back to look Erik in the eyes. Going back to Cedar Falls means facing dangerous men who want to see me hang. I won't ask you to take that risk. If you want to stay here in Willowbrook, if you want to find your birth family— No, Erik interrupted fiercely. You're my family. You're my pa, and we stick together no matter what. Gabriel's throat tightened. Erik, you need to understand what this means. We might not survive the journey. And even if we reach Cedar Falls, we might not survive what we find there. Erik's jaw set with determination that reminded Gabriel of his own daughter at that age. Then we'll die fighting for what's right instead of running from what's wrong. Isn't that what you taught me? That some things are worth standing up for? Gabriel stared at this remarkable boy who had somehow grown wise beyond his years in just a few weeks. Erik was right again. They'd been running long enough. All right then, Gabriel said. We go to Cedar Falls, but we do it smart, and we do it together. Erik nodded solemnly, then surprised Gabriel by asking, What about the people here in Willowbrook? The woman at the store who recognized me. Gabriel had been thinking about that problem all evening. Their presence in town was already causing talk, and the longer they stayed, the more likely someone would make the connection between Erik's face and whatever family he'd lost. We leave tonight, Gabriel decided. Quietly, before anyone can ask more questions, without finding out about my mother. Gabriel saw the conflict in Erik's eyes, the desire to know his history, warring with loyalty to their shared future. It was an impossible choice for a child to make. Erik, there's something I need you to understand. Finding out about your birth family might change everything between us. Are you sure you're ready for that? Erik was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. When he spoke, his voice was steady and certain. You found me when I had nobody. You gave me a name and made me your son, when I was just a scared, dirty boy sitting in the ruins. That's not something blood can take away. Gabriel felt his heart swell with pride and love for this extraordinary child. No, son, that's not something blood can take away. They spent the next hour planning their route to Cedar Falls, using Gabriel's knowledge of the territory and his years of avoiding pursuit. It would be a dangerous journey, requiring them to move through country where Morrison's influence was strong. But for the first time since fleeing Cedar Falls, Gabriel felt hope instead of fear. As they banked the fire and prepared for sleep, Erik pulled the sheriff's badge from his saddlebag and held it up to catch the dying light. Do you think this badge belonged to Deputy Brennan? Erik asked. Gabriel studied the tarnished star, thinking about the man who had died trying to expose corruption. I don't know, son, but I think Thomas Brennan would want us to find the truth, whatever it costs. Erik nodded and carefully wrapped the badge again. Then that's what we'll do. We'll find the truth, and we'll make sure justice wins. As Gabriel lay down beside the dying fire, Mary's letter tucked safely against his heart. He felt something he'd thought lost forever, the certainty that he was fighting for something worth dying for. Tomorrow they would begin the journey back to Cedar Falls, back to the truth that had been waiting 15 years for someone brave enough to claim it. Beside him, Erik slept peacefully, his hand curled around the wooden cross he'd carved. Gabriel watched the boy's steady breathing and made a silent promise to Mary's memory. He would see justice done, no matter the cost. For Erik's future, for his own redemption, and for the deputy who had died trying to do what was right. They left Willowbrook in the deep hours before dawn, when even the most dedicated early risers were still abed. Gabriel had spent the night calculating routes and contingencies, planning their approach to Cedar Falls with the methodical precision of a man whose life depended on thinking 3 moves ahead. Erik had surprised Gabriel by creating a detailed map of their journey together, marking every significant place they'd camped, every stream they'd crossed, every mountain peak that had guided their way. The boy had worked on it during their quiet moments over the past few weeks, using charcoal and the margins of Gabriel's journal to create an artistic record of their shared adventure. "I wanted to remember it all," Erik explained as he showed Gabriel the completed map. "Every place where we learned something important, every spot where you taught me something new. This journey changed my life." Gabriel studied the map with growing amazement. Erik had captured not just geographical features, but emotional landmarks. The place where Gabriel had first called him son, the stream where they'd shared stories about family, the overlook where Gabriel had taught him to read the weather in cloud formations. It was the work of someone who understood that maps were about more than navigation. They were about preserving the memory of transformation. "It's beautiful work," Gabriel said, meaning every word. "The finest map I've ever seen." Erik beamed with pride, then carefully folded the map and tucked it into his shirt pocket next to his mother's photograph. "I'll keep it forever so I can show my children someday. I'll tell them about their grandfather, who found me in the ruins and made me into someone worth being." Gabriel's throat tightened at the casual way Erik spoke of the future, a future that included children and stories and the certainty that their bond would endure whatever trials lay ahead. The boy's faith was absolute, and Gabriel found himself drawing strength from that unwavering confidence. Their route to Cedar Falls would take them through hostile territory, past settlements where Sheriff Morrison's influence ran deep. Gabriel had spent 15 years learning which towns to avoid, which trails offered concealment, which streams could hide their tracks. Now he used all that hard-won knowledge to plan a path that would keep them alive long enough to reach the truth. "Tell me about Cedar Falls," Erik said as they rode through the pre-dawn darkness. "What was it like when you lived there?" Gabriel found himself smiling despite their circumstances. "It was a good town. Clean streets, honest people, churches that actually cared about their congregations. The kind of place where children could grow up safe and neighbors looked out for each other. Do you think it's still like that?" Gabriel's smile faded. "I don't know, son. 15 years of corruption can poison a lot of wells. But there were good people there, people who knew me, who might remember the truth if we can remind them. Like who?" Gabriel thought back to the faces he'd known in his former life. There was Judge Harrison, who presided over the courthouse with real wisdom. Dr. Matthews, who delivered you Sarah and never charged a family who couldn't pay. Mrs. Patterson, who ran the boarding house and cooked for anyone who looked hungry. "If any of them are still alive, they might listen to what we have to say," Erik nodded thoughtfully. "And if they're not, then we rely on the evidence Mary gathered. Truth has a way of speaking for itself when it's finally brought to light." They made good time through the first day, following game trails and creek beds that kept them hidden from the main roads. Gabriel pushed them hard, but not recklessly, balancing speed against the need for caution. Erik never complained, though Gabriel could see the toll their pace was taking on him. During their second day of travel, they encountered other travelers for the first time since leaving Willowbrook. A family in a covered wagon, heading west toward the gold fields, shared their noon meal and their fire. The father was a decent man with calloused hands and worried eyes, the mother quiet but kind. Their 3 children curious about Erik, but too well-mannered to ask intrusive questions. "You folks heading anywhere in particular?" The father asked as they ate beans and hardtack around the shared fire. "East," Gabriel replied carefully. "Got some business to settle." The man nodded, understanding that some business was private. But as they prepared to part ways, he pulled Gabriel aside. "Don't mean to pry, but I've heard talk in the settlements. There's men looking for a fellow matches your description, traveling with a boy. Might be wise to vary your route some." Gabriel felt cold settle in his stomach. "What kind of men?" "The kind that carry more guns than conversation. They've been asking questions, offering money for information." The man glanced toward Erik, who was helping the children gather firewood. "That's a fine boy you've got there. Be a shame if anything happened to him." Gabriel thanked the man and filed the warning away with all the other dangers they faced. Sheriff Morrison's reach was longer than Gabriel had hoped, his resources deeper. But knowing about the pursuit meant Gabriel could plan for it. That evening, as they made camp in a hidden valley beside a clear stream, Gabriel began teaching Erik more advanced survival skills. Not just the basics they'd covered before, but the kind of knowledge that might save the boy's life if they were separated. "If something happens to me," Gabriel said, showing Erik how to cache supplies for an emergency, "you head for the town of Liberty Creek. Ask for a man named Benjamin Torres. He runs the livery stable there. Tell him Gabriel Morrison sent you, and he'll see you're taken care of." Erik's face went pale. "Nothing's going to happen to you, Pa." "Probably not," Gabriel agreed. "But a smart man prepares for possibilities he hopes he'll never face." They spent the evening reviewing escape routes, emergency signals, and the kind of woodcraft that could keep a person alive in hostile country. Erik absorbed it all with the focused attention of someone who understood that knowledge might be the difference between life and death. "Pa," Erik said, as they settled in for the night, "are you scared?" Gabriel considered lying, offering false reassurance that might make the boy feel better. But Erik deserved honesty, even when the truth was frightening. "I'm terrified," Gabriel admitted. "Not of dying. I've been carrying that possibility for 15 years. But I'm scared of failing you, of not being able to give you the future you deserve." Erik was quiet for a moment, then surprised Gabriel by reaching over and taking his hand. "You already gave me everything I deserve," Erik said simply. "You gave me a name, a family, and the knowledge that I'm worth saving. Even if everything goes wrong tomorrow, you already gave me more than I ever had before." Gabriel squeezed Erik's hand, marveling at the wisdom that seemed to come so naturally to this remarkable boy. "How did you get so smart?" "I had a good teacher," Erik replied with a small smile. On their 3rd day of travel, Gabriel began to recognize landmarks from his former life. Hills he'd climbed with Sarah, streams where he'd taken Mary for picnic lunches, the distant outline of mountains that had framed their view from the schoolhouse windows. Each familiar sight brought a flood of memories, some painful, others bittersweet, all of them reminding Gabriel of what he'd lost and what he might yet reclaim. "We're getting close, aren't we?" Erik observed, noting the change in Gabriel's demeanor. 2 more days, maybe 3, depending on how careful we need to be." Erik pulled out his map and made a few final additions, marking their current position and the route ahead. Gabriel watched him work and felt a surge of pride at the boy's methodical approach to documentation. "Erik," Gabriel said carefully, "when we get to Cedar Falls, things might happen fast. There might not be time for long conversations or explanations. I need you to promise me something." Erik looked up from his map. "What?" "Promise me that no matter what happens, no matter what anyone says about me or about our family, you'll remember that I love you. That you're my son in every way that matters." Erik's eyes were serious as he considered Gabriel's request. "I promise, Pa, but you have to promise me something, too." "What's that?" "Promise me you won't give up. Even if it looks hopeless, even if everyone's against us. Promise me you'll keep fighting for the truth." Gabriel met Erik's steady gaze and saw not a frightened child, but a young man of remarkable courage and conviction. "I promise, son. I'll fight until my last breath." They sealed their mutual promises with a handshake, then continued their journey towards Cedar Falls and whatever truth waited there. Gabriel had spent 15 years running from his past, but now he was riding toward it with renewed purpose. The evidence Mary had gathered would either vindicate him or see him hang. But either way, the running would finally be over. And whatever happened, Erik would know that his father had faced the truth with courage rather than continuing to live a lie. As the sun set behind the western peaks, Gabriel touched the letter in his coat pocket and whispered a silent prayer to Mary's memory. Tomorrow they would begin the final approach to Cedar Falls and the destiny that had been waiting 15 years for them to claim it. Cedar Falls had grown in the 15 years since Gabriel's exile, but the heart of the town remained unchanged. The courthouse still dominated the main square with its imposing stone facade. The First National Bank stood solid and reassuring on the corner of Main and Cedar Streets. And the old schoolhouse, his schoolhouse, sat quietly at the end of Elm Avenue, like a patient friend waiting for his return. Gabriel pulled the worn teacher's watch from his vest pocket, checking the time with hands that trembled slightly. 3:15 in the morning. The town slept peacefully around them, unaware that its past was about to collide with its present in ways that would shake every comfortable assumption. The citizens had built their lives upon the watch had been a gift from his students during his final year of teaching, 17 young faces pooling their pocket money to buy their beloved Professor Morrison a timepiece worthy of his dedication. Gabriel had carried it through every mile of his exile, its steady ticking a reminder that time moved forward even when life seemed frozen in place. "Pa," Erik whispered, his voice barely audible in the pre-dawn stillness. "Are you ready?" Gabriel studied his son's face in the pale moonlight, seeing courage there that humbled him. Erik understood the risks they faced, knew that entering this town might mean losing everything they'd built together. Yet his faith never wavered. "As ready as I'll ever be," Gabriel replied, tucking the watch away. "Remember what we discussed?" Erik nodded solemnly. "Stay close to you. Don't speak unless spoken to. If things go bad, get to the livery stable and wait for you there. And if I don't come, find Benjamin Torres in Liberty Creek." Erik's voice was steady, but Gabriel caught the flash of pain in his eyes. "But you will come, Pa. I know you will." Gabriel wished he shared Erik's certainty, but 15 years of running had taught him that good intentions didn't guarantee good outcomes. Still, Erik's faith gave him strength as they approached the bank's rear entrance. The alley behind First National Bank was exactly as Gabriel remembered, narrow, shadowed, lined with the backs of respectable businesses that showed their less impressive faces to the world. Gabriel had played in this alley as a boy, had walked through it countless times as a young teacher, heading home from evening meetings at the school board. Now, he knelt beside the bank's back door with tools he'd learned to use. During his years in the wilderness, carefully working the lock with the patience his teaching had developed. Erik kept watch, his young eyes sharp in the darkness that concealed them. "Someone's coming," Erik breathed. Pressing himself against the brick wall, Gabriel froze, listening for the sound that had alerted Erik. There, the measured tread of boots on wooden sidewalk, the jingle of spurs, the low murmur of conversation. Night watchmen making their rounds, or perhaps something more sinister. They waited in tense silence as two figures passed the mouth of the alley, their shapes barely visible in the weak light from the street lamps. Gabriel caught fragments of their conversation, something about maintaining vigilance, about rewards for information, about orders from the sheriff, Morrison's men. Gabriel's jaw tightened as he recognized the reality of their situation. The sheriff had been expecting this moment for 15 years, had probably prepared for Gabriel's eventual return. But Gabriel had advantages Morrison couldn't anticipate. Knowledge of the town's hidden places, allies Morrison didn't know about, and most importantly, the truth that Mary had died protecting. The lock yielded to Gabriel's patient ministrations with a soft click that seemed thunderous in the pre-dawn quiet. Gabriel eased the door open, grateful for the bank's well-maintained hinges that moved without protest. Inside, the bank smelled of leather and ink and the lingering aroma of pipe tobacco from the president's office. Gabriel moved through the familiar space with careful steps, remembering the layout from the days when he'd conducted the school's banking business here. The safety deposit boxes occupied a small room behind the main vault, each one secured with dual locks that required both the bank's key and the customer's. Gabriel found the box, registered to Mary Catherine Whitfield, and felt his heart clench at seeing her maiden name in the careful script of the bank ledger. The key should be where she said, Gabriel murmured, more to himself than to Erik. But first, they had to survive the next few minutes. Gabriel could hear movement in the street outside. More footsteps, hushed voices, the sound of horses being positioned. Morrison's men were moving into place, setting up for something that could only mean trouble. "Pa," Erik whispered urgently. "There are men outside. Lots of them." Gabriel moved to the window and peered through a gap in the curtains. His blood turned to ice as he counted at least 6 mounted figures taking positions around the bank. They'd been expected, probably spotted the moment they entered town. "We're trapped," Gabriel said, his mind racing through options that all seemed to lead to disaster. But Erik surprised him by pulling out the sheriff's badge they'd found in the abandoned cabin, its tarnished surface catching the weak light from the street. "Not trapped," Erik said with quiet determination. "We have the truth and we have each other. That's enough to face anything." Gabriel looked at this remarkable boy who had become his anchor in a world of shifting loyalties and corrupt justice. Erik was right. They had the truth and they had each other. Sometimes that was enough to move mountains. Outside, Sheriff Morrison's voice cut through the morning air like a blade. "Gabriel Morrison, I know you're in there. Come out now, and maybe the boy doesn't have to suffer for your crimes." Gabriel's hands clenched into fists. Morrison was using Erik as leverage, threatening the one person in the world Gabriel couldn't bear to lose. But Gabriel had learned patience during his years of exile, had developed the measured response of a teacher rather than the hot anger of youth. "Not yet," Gabriel murmured, pulling Erik deeper into the bank's shadows. "We're not done here yet." The original court documents lay spread across the bank president's desk like accusations made manifest. Gabriel's hands shook as he read through 15 years of lies laid bare in Mary's careful handwriting and Walter Hutchins' methodical investigation. Deputy Thomas Brennan hadn't been killed by Gabriel Morrison. He'd been murdered by Sheriff Morrison's own son, Clayton, to prevent exposure of a cattle rustling operation that reached into the highest levels of county government. Mary had uncovered it all. Financial records showing unexplained deposits in the Morrison family accounts. Witness statements from ranchers who'd seen Clayton Morrison with known rustlers. Most damning of all, a signed confession from Clayton himself, given to Walter Hutchins just days before the young man died, in what Morrison had claimed was a hunting accident. "Pa, look at this," Erik whispered, holding up a photograph that had been tucked among the documents. Gabriel's breath caught. The image showed Deputy Thomas Brennan, wearing the same badge they'd found in the abandoned cabin, standing beside a group of honest lawmen who'd been investigating the corruption. On the back, in Brennan's careful handwriting, "The evidence is hidden where truth waits for justice. M.W. will know. Mary would know." Gabriel's wife had been Thomas Brennan's cousin, a connection Gabriel had forgotten in his years of grief and exile. Brennan had trusted Mary with the location of additional evidence that might still be waiting to be discovered. Outside, Sheriff Morrison's voice grew more insistent. "You've got 5 minutes, Morrison. After that, I'm coming in, and I can't guarantee the boy's safety." Gabriel gathered the documents with swift efficiency, tucking them inside his coat next to Mary's letter. Erik helped by organizing the loose papers, his young hands steady despite the danger surrounding them. "There's more evidence somewhere," Gabriel said quietly. "Brennan hid something else, something Mary knew about." "Where?" Erik asked. Gabriel closed his eyes, thinking back to conversations with Mary about her cousin Thomas, about places they'd played as children, about secrets shared between family members who trusted each other completely. "The old mill," Gabriel said suddenly. "Mary and Thomas used to hide things there when they were children. where truth waits for justice. The mill's grinding wheel has veritas carved into the stone. Truth. Erik's eyes lit with understanding. We have to get there. Gabriel looked toward the windows, where Morrison's men waited with rifles and patience born of certainty. Getting to the mill would require moving through the heart of town in daylight, past men who'd shoot first and ask questions later. Erik, Gabriel said carefully, I need you to listen to me very carefully. What I'm about to ask you to do is dangerous, but it might be our only chance. The boy nodded solemnly. I'm listening, Pa. Gabriel knelt beside Erik, meeting his eyes with the gravity the moment demanded. I'm going to walk out that front door and surrender to Morrison. While his attention is on me, you slip out the back and get to the mill. Find whatever Brennan hid there and bring it to the courthouse. No, Erik said immediately. We stick together. That's what we promised. Son, this is the only way. No! Erik's voice was fierce with determination. You taught me that family means never abandoning each other. You taught me that truth is worth fighting for. We do this together, or we don't do it at all. Gabriel stared at this remarkable boy who had somehow become wiser than his years should allow. Erik was right. They'd come this far together, had faced every challenge as a team. Separating now would betray everything they'd built together. All right, Gabriel said finally. Together, but we do this smart. Gabriel moved to the bank's front window and called out in a voice that carried the authority of his former profession. Morrison! I want to talk! A time for talking's over, Morrison. Come out with your hands visible. I have evidence. Gabriel shouted back. Evidence that proves Thomas Brennan was murdered by your son. The silence that followed was loaded with tension. Gabriel could imagine Morrison's mind racing, calculating the implications of Gabriel's claim, weighing the risks of allowing the conversation to continue. You're lying, Morrison finally called back, but Gabriel detected uncertainty in the sheriff's voice. Mary gathered it all before she died. Financial records, witness statements, Clayton's own confession before you killed him to keep him quiet. That's enough. Morrison's voice cracked like a whip. You've got 30 seconds to come out, or I'm sending my men in. Gabriel looked at Erik, seeing courage and determination in the boy's face that made him proud beyond words. Ready, son? Erik pulled out the sheriff's badge and held it up to catch the morning light streaming through the bank's windows. Deputy Brennan deserves justice, and so do you. Let's go get it. Gabriel felt something settle in his chest. Not peace exactly, but the clarity that came from finally knowing the right course of action. For 15 years he'd been running from the truth. Now it was time to run toward it, whatever the cost. They moved toward the bank's front door together, father and son united in purpose, carrying the evidence that would either vindicate them or see them both destroyed. Outside, Sheriff Morrison waited with his guns and his lies. But Gabriel no longer feared him. The truth was finally coming to light, and lies could never stand against it for long. The new family Bible sat on the kitchen table of their small house on Elm Avenue, its leather binding still stiff with newness, its pages crisp and white as fresh snow. The townspeople of Cedar Falls had presented it to Gabriel and Erik during the dedication ceremony for the new schoolhouse, their faces glowing with the satisfaction of a community that had reclaimed its honor. 3 months had passed since Sheriff Morrison's arrest. 3 months since the truth had finally conquered 15 years of lies. The evidence Mary and Thomas Brennan had died protecting had done its work with surgical precision, cutting away the corruption that had infected Cedar Falls like a surgeon's blade, removing diseased tissue. Gabriel opened the Bible to the family records page, where births and deaths and marriages were traditionally recorded. In his careful teacher's handwriting, he had inscribed the most important entry of all, Erik Morrison, beloved son, officially adopted this day, October 15th, 1885. Erik looked up from his arithmetic homework, his face breaking into the smile that never failed to warm Gabriel's heart. Read it again, Pa. Gabriel chuckled and read the inscription aloud, savoring each word like a prayer answered after long waiting. The legal adoption had been a formality. Erik had been his son in every way that mattered, from the moment Gabriel claimed him in those burned ruins. but having it officially recognized by law felt like the final piece of a puzzle clicking into place. "Now we're family forever," Erik said with satisfaction. "No one can ever say we don't belong together. We were family forever from the beginning," Gabriel replied, settling into the chair beside Erik's. "The papers just make it official for folks who need such things written down." Through the window, Gabriel could see students walking home from the new Cedar Falls Academy, their voices carrying on the autumn air as they discussed lessons and plans for the weekend. The school board had offered Gabriel the position of headmaster, recognizing that his years of exile had given him wisdom that couldn't be learned from books. Teaching again felt like putting on clothes that fit perfectly after years of wearing ill-fitting garments. Gabriel had forgotten the simple joy of watching young minds grasp new concepts, the satisfaction of nurturing curiosity into knowledge. Erik attended classes during the day, proving to be one of the brightest students Gabriel had ever taught. But their real education continued each evening around this very table. "Tell me about the trial again," Erik said, setting aside his arithmetic to give Gabriel his full attention. Gabriel had told this story dozens of times, but Erik never tired of hearing how justice had finally triumphed over corruption. Judge Harrison read every piece of evidence Mary and Thomas Brennan had gathered. The financial records, the witness statements, Clayton Morrison's confession, all of it. By the time the prosecution finished presenting their case, there wasn't a person in that courtroom who doubted the truth. "What about Sheriff Morrison? What did he say?" "He tried to claim it was all lies, that Mary and I had fabricated the evidence to clear my name. But too many people remembered Thomas Brennan as an honest man, and too many folks had seen things over the years that made sense once the truth came out." Gabriel remembered the moment when Morrison's facade had finally cracked, when the weight of 15 years of lies had become too heavy to carry. The sheriff had broken down completely, confessing not only to framing Gabriel, but to killing his own son to prevent exposure of their crimes. And now he's in prison forever. 25 years to life, Gabriel confirmed. He'll die behind bars, which is more mercy than he showed Thomas Brennan or his own son. Erik nodded with the gravity of someone who understood that justice sometimes required harsh consequences. The boy had developed a strong moral compass during their time together, guided by Gabriel's teaching and his own innate sense of right and wrong. A knock at the door interrupted their conversation. Gabriel opened it to find Dr. Matthews standing on their porch, his medical bag in one hand and a warm smile creasing his weathered face. "Evening, Gabriel. Erik. Mind if I come in for a spell?" Dr. Matthews had been one of Gabriel's strongest supporters during the trial, testifying about the kind of man Gabriel had been before his exile, vouching for his character when others might have doubted. His friendship meant more to Gabriel than any official vindication. "Coffee's fresh," Gabriel said, welcoming the doctor inside. "Erik was just finishing his homework." "Actually, I came to see Erik," Dr. Matthews said, settling into a chair with the careful movements of a man whose joints had seen too many long nights attending to the sick and injured. "Got a proposition for you, young man." Erik looked up with interest. "What kind of proposition?" "I'm getting old, and I need someone to help me around the office. Someone smart enough to learn and young enough to grow into the work. Interested in learning about medicine?" Erik's eyes went wide. "You mean really learning? About healing people? Real learning? Reading medical texts, understanding anatomy, maybe even helping with simple procedures when you're old enough?" Dr. Matthews looked at Gabriel. "With your father's permission, of course." Gabriel felt his chest swell with pride as he watched Erik consider this opportunity. The boy had always shown compassion for injured animals and curiosity about how things worked. Medicine might be the perfect path for someone with his combination of intelligence and empathy. "What do you think, Pa?" Erik asked. "I think," Gabriel said carefully, "that a man who saves lives does the most important work in the world. If that calls to you, son, then you should answer." Erik grinned and turned back to Dr. Matthews. "Yes, sir. I'd like that very much. As Gabriel watched Erik shake hands with Dr. Matthews, sealing the agreement that would shape the boy's future, he felt a deep sense of completion. Erik would grow up to be a healer, using his hands to mend what was broken rather than destroy what was whole. That night, after Dr. Matthews had left and Erik had gone to bed, Gabriel sat alone in his kitchen with the family Bible open before him. He turned to the page where he'd recorded Erik's adoption and added one more line. God's providence works in mysterious ways, bringing broken souls together so they might heal each other. Outside, Cedar Falls slept peacefully under a canopy of stars, its citizens secure in the knowledge that justice had been served and truth had prevailed. Gabriel closed the Bible and headed toward his own rest, grateful beyond words for the day he'd found a nameless boy in burned ruins and discovered that saving someone else's life was the only way to save his own. In the morning, there would be lessons to teach and lives to touch, a future to build with the son who had chosen him as surely as he had chosen the boy. It was, Gabriel thought as sleep claimed him, the finest life a man could hope for.